Hi everyone, we're Gabby,
Karim,
and Jules.
and you're listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health.
last season we took you behind the scenes of some of our mock MMI stations.
So we've talked about the GAMSAT and we've talked about the interviews. So now on to the next step. This season we're talking all things getting ready for med school.
We will be running you through what a day in the life of a medical student looks like, what study techniques to know about, what your career is going to look like, and much more.
So stay tuned and get ready to get med ready.
Hey everyone, it is Gabby here, and on this week's episode of the podcast, we are starting our brand new series, the Panel Episode Series. Before I tell you about them, I will just start with an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I am recording and editing this podcast today, that is the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nations. I would like to pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging, as well as pay my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are listeners of the podcast. So this panel episode series that we're doing is all about getting students on from different universities, telling us all about the course structure and what it's really like to study medicine at that university. Each episode, we're going to focus on a different state to help you sort of compare and contrast the different options you have for studying medicine. So the goal of this is to really help listeners who are applying for medicine this year. The GEMSAS application window has opened and it closes at the end of May. So it's all about helping you really figure out what your preferences are and what uni is best for you. So this isn't a be-all and end-all resource by any means, but hopefully it just gives you a bit more of an insight as to what it's really like to study at those universities. So this episode is the first of the series and we're focusing on New South Wales. So we have Gabby, who is a first-year medical student at Macquarie University, Tom, who is a second-year medical student at the University of Notre Dame, Sydney, and Catherine, who is a first-year medical student at the University of Sydney. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you find some of the information useful, and thank you to Tom, Catherine, and Gabby for joining me on this episode today. Hope you enjoy. All right, we'll just start with Gabby, the different Gabby, not me, the Gabby from Macquarie. Did you want to start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey into medicine?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Gabby. So I did a Bachelor of Biomedical Science at Monash University, graduating in 2019. And so through that, I sat the GAMSAT 3 times, twice in my second year, once in my third year. And then interviewed for Notre Dame in my end of my third year, didn't get in. So then I got into a Master of Audiology, did that for a year. And then my highest GAMSAT score was going to expire. So I was like, I'll just apply randomly. And then managed to get an interview for Macquarie in my first year of audiology, and then got accepted. And so now I'm said goodbye to audiology, finished halfway through, and now studying at Macquarie. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And Tom?
Hi guys, so I'm Tom. So I was similar to Gabby. I did my undergrad at Monash University. So I also did a Bachelor of Biomedical Science, but I completed that with a minor in history. So I found that during my time at Monash, I tried many different things, and I really used the breadth that were available as elective subjects. So I found that works really well for me. I got to learn a lot of different areas and also have a really good crack at them. I think this kind of mix allowed me to volunteer a lot as well. And so I was fortunate enough to be part of the founding of Allied to Health, which we're talking on today, with Eliza, and I've been serving with the board of directors since then. So for me, I used kind of those breadths and those other interests as part of my application when considering my portfolio. And this is basically to show that I was able to kind of apply thinking beyond just solely the scientific disciplines. So that's something that I kind of focused on. And I think that that's a common thread with a lot of my peers at Notre Dame now, who all share a similar mindset. So kind of going on from that, I sat the GAMSAT twice and then worked on my portfolio. So I was fortunate to get a view at the end of my third year of biomed in 2019. And then, of course, very lucky to get offered a spot following that. So I moved up to Sydney at the start of last year, which was an interesting experience, and have been at Notre Dame since then.
Beautiful. Thank you. And lucky last, Catherine.
I'd say that my journey in medicine was a pretty typical, not very interesting journey. So I did my undergrad in anatomy and histology. I did my GAMSAT twice, once in first year in the September sitting, and then once in second year in the kind of, once in second year, once in third year in the kind of online COVID space, which was fun. I applied to Sydney Uni and to Melbourne Uni, and I got an interview for Melbourne, but I'd already got my conditional offer for Sydney Uni, so I decided not to do that and then to just go through to Sydney. I didn't actually have an interview this year because Sydney's gotten rid of their interviews because of COVID, which was fun. So I didn't have to do that, which was a big breath of fresh air. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Things have changed quite a bit in the last 12 months, especially in the med application field, which is what we're going to talk about now. So each uni has their own sort of different requirements to get in, different thresholds and different things that you need for your application process. So we're going to talk through that now and what these three different unis, how they differ. Gabby, would you like to start us off with Macquarie?
Yeah, sure. So the places that Macquarie offers is only full fee places. So I'm paying currently $70,000 a year, but beware, you can actually put it onto fee help for your first 2 years. I think that's where it maxes out. So yeah, that's one thing you really got to consider when if you're going to apply to Macquarie, is definitely the full fees. In terms of the cutoffs and what you need to get in, it's pretty typical in terms of the fact that you need to get a minimum of 50 in every section and above 50 for the GAMSAT. GPA probably about a 5 out of 7 or a WAM of 65, and then an interview. And then we also had to do a personal statement, which was just 2 questions on international placements. So if I could give a rough guide, so the average GAMSAT for the last 3 years for entry was about 64, and then the GPA was about a 6.5, if I remember correctly, from my first week at uni. And then the personal statement questions, I think it was asking about the benefits of international placement, and then the cultural differences you experience with international placement and what you would do to overcome that or how you would address that in your actual practice. So yeah, the other thing is which is really good about Macquarie in terms of the application is that to get an interview, they weigh your GAMSAT and your GPA 50-50, as long as if you complete the personal statement satisfactorily or something. And then once you've got the interview, they knock out your GAMSAT, they don't look at it again. And then it becomes 50-50 with GPA and your interview. So that was something that was surprising to me when I was I only found out about that waiting post getting in. So that was something I wish that I had known, because it took a lot of pressure off afterwards, which is really weird.
Yeah, that's definitely something I didn't know, but good to know for anyone interested in that university for sure. And Tom, what about UND?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So obviously I go to the University of Notre Dame, and so I'm at the School of Medicine, Sydney. And so when I applied, you had to apply individually for the School of Medicine, Sydney, as opposed to the School of Medicine in Fremantle. So they're 2 separate institutions when you're applying through GEMSAS. That is, however, changing. To the best of my knowledge, there is currently a transition of combining the school into a national School of Medicine at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. So that's something to check and to probably have a look at a bit further if this is something you're interested in. And I would also encourage anyone interested to check the exact details, but to the best of my knowledge, the rough breakdown is approximately 50% Commonwealth supported places, about 40% or so full fee places, 10% bonded medical places. So these vary, I think, year to year, but that's generally the breakdown. And something worth noting that has been communicated is that the full fee place is subsidised heavily at Notre Dame. representing, I think, approximately 150,000 for the entirety of the course. So most of that is actually under the fee help cap, to my knowledge. So that's something that if you're interested in, would be worth doing more research, but I thought it might be relevant to mention. So the application process to Notre Dame is a portfolio uni. So this is something that's emphasized by the uni as something that they hold in pretty high regard. So the breakdown in your application is a third GAMSAT and GPA, a third portfolio, and then a third your interview. And I think these three combined will determine whether you get a place or not. That's to the best of my knowledge. I think these things change. So you apply through GEMSAS with your portfolio. My advice for anyone looking at a portfolio uni would be starting a lot earlier than you think. It takes a long time. It's a hot minute to try chase up relevant references and people to support you in anything that you're claiming you've done. And so finally, I might just mention a bit more about what a portfolio entails, because this was something that took a little bit of time for me to get my head around. So a portfolio is basically an opportunity for you to represent your achievements or milestones, which aren't necessarily confined to your undergrad academic results. So these might be sporting, they might be musical, leadership, service, or volunteering. It's basically an opportunity to try communicate to the university what sort of person you are, because that's something that they like to select for. So yeah, that's just a little bit about that. And I'll hand it over to Catherine.
Okay, thank you. So the University of Sydney application has a few similarities between the previous two unis, but is a little bit different in some aspects. So we also have Commonwealth supported places and bonded medical places. Something that we didn't really mention is that our uni also has really, really good rural and Indigenous entry pathways into medicine, which is something to look at if you fit into either one of those categories. So the application process is basically as follows. So you use your GPA as a hurdle. So once you have a credit average, then everybody kind of gets put on the same playing field. And then from there, in the typical years, you would go into 50% of your 50% weighting on your GAMSAT score, and then 50% weighting on your interview. Obviously, in my year, we didn't have an interview, so it was slightly different in how they weight us up for that. I know there have been a few changes for 2022 where they're still not doing the interview because of COVID. And I think they've added a statement or something, but it would be a good thing to check out as well. I also just wanted to echo what Tom said about the application process being really long. And it also has a lot of key dates that they're really strict on. So just pay attention to that. Every uni usually has a breakdown and like a timeline for you to follow. So as long as you follow that, you'll be right. And we also don't have a portfolio. So that's the difference with us as well.
Yeah, definitely an important note to look out for the key dates. I know Sydney is surprisingly early and lots of people miss it.
Yeah.
Which is a bit scary. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Also with portfolio writing, Halad are going to be running a free webinar in the upcoming weeks. So listen out for that. Just tips and tricks on how to write an effective portfolio, basically. But we'll move on to the next question now, which is one of the key defining features, I think, between universities and choosing between universities is the actual course breakdown. So clinical years, pre-clinical years, and what the actual course looks like. So Gabby, did you want to talk us through Macquarie's course structure?
Yeah, so Macquarie is it's a very new university, so it's changing a lot. Like our first cohort graduates at the end of this year. We have had nobody in internships yet or anything, so we have no idea what's going to happen for us. But what my year is currently looking at for like my next 4 years is the first year, so MD1 is preclinical. It's purely theory. We're going to go through all the basics of like the heart, the lungs, all that jazz. And then MD2 it's classified as preclinical, but then we have 1 day a week in the clinic that's on the university. So because we have on the campus, we have the university hospital across the road from us. So it's we get to like work in the clinics pretty quickly. And then MD3 and MD4 both clinical. But for MD3, you spend 6 months in India. We have a partnership with a hospital over there. So we do 6 months placement over there. and then 6 months placement in the University Hospital or the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney. And then MD from what I understand, because it's constantly changing, it's 8 weeks, like either internationally, locally, rural, wherever you want to go. And then so that's like your elective placements, and the rest of it's just general placements in the hospital. Yeah.
Beautiful. That India placement sounds pretty cool, which is definitely a standout feature for Macquarie.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's really keen to do it because it looks like I might be the first year to go. So exciting.
You'll have to tell us the 411.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for that. And Tom, what about UND?
Yeah, so Notre Dame follows a structure of the first 2 years being preclinical primarily, and then the second 2 being clinical placements for pretty much full time. So this is just the structure of the course. So in your first and second year, there are a number of placements, despite it being preclinical. So there are some GP placements, some surgical skills sessions, clinical skills, various site visits to pathology labs, allied health, and rural trauma week. So these kind of give you an insight into what's kind of going on without necessarily being in the hospital per se. And I think something to mention during kind of the preclinical years, so the first 2, is that the societies and interests surrounding Notre Dame are just prolific. I'd say there's probably half the cohort on some form of committee or organising some sort of interest. So this is really a time where there's lots of student-run events and kind of interests surrounding the various areas of medicine before you're actually very busy with being in a hospital. And then the clinical years are 3rd and 4th year, as I mentioned, and there are a number of locations which I can kind of get to a little bit later, but there are kind of options to be placed rurally in New South Wales and Victoria, and clinical schools in both Sydney and Melbourne. So there are a variety of options, a variety of placements that students at Notre Dame can undertake. So that I'll handball it back over to Catherine.
Thank you. So again, we have like a few pretty significant differences between the unis in terms of clinical and preclinical years. So Sydney Uni is a little bit different in that they don't specifically have like 2 years allocated to preclinical and then 2 for clinical. We kind of start in clinic in first year. So this year we'll be doing 1 day a week in clinic. And then next year we'll move to 3 days a week in clinic. And we also have a rotation, a GP rotation, where we spend an additional day per week in a GP office. And then 3rd and 4th year full-time at the hospital. And 4th year makes up our pre-internship sort of year, which I've really enjoyed so far. And lots of opportunities to go to different clinical skills all around, clinical schools, sorry, all around Sydney, which has been really good for us so far.
Yeah, beautiful. USYD sort of sounds like the new Uni-Melb model before COVID hit. What they plan to do, I should say, with the first year integrating placement straight away, 1 day. Yeah, it sounds really good. But yeah, now moving on to the last part, which is going to be my favorite question. It's basically what sold this uni to you? So what's your favorite part of the uni at the moment, or what sold you to put that as the university that you want to go to? Yeah, Gabby, did you want to take us away?
Yeah, so I actually didn't know where Macquarie was until after I applied. I had to Google it. I thought it was in Queensland when I first applied. So I kind of just put it on because I had a lower, because my GAMSAT was only 61. So I put it on because I was like accepting like lower averages. I was like, okay, maybe I can talk my way in as opposed to like using my grades to get in. And then actually once I got in and like started researching a bit about it, I was like, actually, I'm really keen for this. Like I mentioned before, we have that 6-month stint in India, and they really encourage being a global doctor, which is one of my big passions. So yeah, that also helps that our hospital and clinical school are right on site. So we have like easy access to the physicians our lecturers and everything that we have to like talk to, which is really nice. Then I suppose like another big like draw for me was a small cohort. I only have 60 people in my cohort. So I've been at uni for 6 weeks now, and I know everybody. Like we are such a, like, it's just tight knit. I'm already feeling a family, and because I moved from Melbourne to Sydney, so I needed that family, and I found that like that instant family, which was really nice. But I will say, like, I had to weigh up a lot. Like, I'm going to bring in the negatives here a little bit. So I had definitely to consider the fees when I was moving. Like, yes, India is a great draw, but I also have to pay for it. But luckily it is included in the fees, which is nice. And then the fact that I actually don't know what the gist is with the internships, like how easy is it for a Macquarie student to get an internship? We won't know until our first year graduates, which we have to wait a year for. So next year's cohort might have a bit more of an idea of what's going on, but we still have to, like, I won't know. So yeah, I think whilst it's like all these great things on a small cohort and India placement, you really got to weigh up, like, if you're going to consider the fees and if you're willing to have such a new uni coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some really good points, that there's pros and cons to every university. You're not going to find a perfect uni. It doesn't exist. So you have to figure out what's best for you and figure out your priorities and what's most important. But it seems pretty good so far. And yeah.
It's a really good uni. Everything's like so fresh and new. It's like it's like such a, like, I think the university in general is new. I think they've only got 3 faculties there at the moment, which is ridiculous. But yeah, so it's definitely something, like you say, pros and cons to everything. And it's just sitting down and making a list and figuring out what's best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even know Macquarie was that new. I thought it was around for ages. There we go. And Tom, what about you with Notre Dame?
Yeah, so I'll just probably mention a few things and just leave them out there for whoever's listening. So I'd probably say that for me, probably the biggest thing about Notre Dame are just the people, because it's such a process with the portfolio. You have such a mix of backgrounds. So, you've got people who have been CEOs or athletes and mature students and, playwrights. It's just such a mix of people. But I think, all those kind of different tangents just make for such good conversation and clinical reasoning. So I really love that. I think the people are really supportive and really positive. Similar to kind of Gabby talking about, we've got quite a small cohort of 120, 130 in most years. So that's another plus in my eyes, becoming quite close with everyone in the year. And the spiral curriculum is something that I think Notre Dame and University of Queensland share in common. And whilst it's been a bit weird to start with, it is actually, I find it quite a good way to learn. So it might be worth doing some research on if you're interested. And then the final two I'll probably just mention are, the location in Sydney is fantastic. It's in Darlinghurst, right opposite St Vincent's Hospital, which, for a bit of trivia, 37 years ago today, performed the first heart transplant in Australia. So, yesterday, sorry. So it's pretty incredible. You're surrounded and got some great links with incredible institutions, and those are also evident in their flexible clinical school locations, from Wagga to Hawkesbury, Ballarat, and of course, lots of options in hospitals in both Melbourne and Sydney. So these are just a few brief reasons why you might consider Notre Dame being a good fit for you.
Absolutely. Happy birthday, first heart transplant in Oz. Very fun fact. Thanks, Tom. And Catherine, what about you for USYD?
Okay, so mine, I think the biggest draw for me would have been the clinical exposure, honestly, from like week 1. I think going into clinics, pretty intimidating, and I still get quite into, like, I haven't been at uni for that long, and I still get pretty intimidated walking up to the nurse's station and being like, hi, I'm a medical student. But that's made me feel a lot more comfortable than I think I would have otherwise. So I'm really liking that so far, the clinical focus, especially next year, getting to spend significantly more time there, I think is really going to help me, especially with applying all the sort of scientific medical knowledge that we're learning to real patients, I think is really valuable. There are a few different clinical schools that you can get allocated to. I know my clinical school is really close to the uni, which is great for me, but other people have their clinical school close to their home. which is good for them as well. But sometimes people have to do a little bit of travel, which isn't always ideal. I think also the opportunity in 3rd and 4th year, we get for some of our placements, we can do interstate placements and also overseas placements. Hopefully, if willing, that returns. But that is an option as well. The downside compared to what everyone else was saying is that we do have a really large cohort. So I think it increased this year and we have 320 students this year. So I definitely don't know everyone. But I do have like a good group of friends so far, which has been really, really helpful. And yeah, that's USYD.
Beautiful. Yeah, every uni's got their own perks. But hopefully this helped the listeners who are considering the New South Wales unis and helped them compare it a little bit to hear your stories. So thank you all for coming on and answering all the questions and for providing all of that useful information. It just puts it in one easy spot for all the listeners. So I think it's really helpful. So thank you all. And I hope you enjoy the rest of, some of you have weeks off. Some of you don't, sorry. Enjoy the rest of uni week.
Thanks, Gabby. Go well, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health. Please like, share and subscribe to help spread the word about our podcast. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So send us an email or message on Facebook. All of our links are in the show notes. Thanks. We'll see you next time.